Progressively, they're able to see relativity, not just being defined by the system. And as they evolve in this way, they're able to think independent thoughts. They begin to embrace other thought forms, cultural relativity, value relativity, and so on. You see, which only emphasizes and intensifies the feeling of being different. By the time this arises into the second stage, and this is the most problematic stage, really, because these people are now so detached, so alienated, and so able to see the relativity of it all. And at this point they have a natural perception that cycles somehow just keep repeating, that history tends to keep repeating, that the creative impulse of many for centuries is somehow typically stuffed and suppressed and not developed. So that creates a psychology of futility. Futility, or pessimism, or the thought of what's the point? And by having this kind of thought process, they remain disengaged from the society through the psychology of alienation. Typically, these sorts of souls are highly idealistic. There's nothing wrong in the ideals. The problems this type will have is in the expectations linked with the ideals. And so since we clearly live in an imperfect reality, always has been, always will be, and this person has this sort of perception, you can now clearly see that their expectations linked with the ideals are typically frustrated, which only reinforces alienation. All of this in combination typically produces a quite angry person. Yes? They feel they have real capacity, but based on this kind of psychology do not make the effort to integrate into the very system they're feeling alienated from. And the psychological trick that moves this person forward, the transference in thought, the metamorphosis in the psychology, is to realize that the value is in the effort, not the outcome. In this stage is an investment into the outcome. And as long as there's this investment, it re-emphasizes and recycles these self-defeating thoughts. So the trick, when you're counseling such people, values in the effort. This allows the third stage to be evolved into, in which now the person has realized the lesson, evolutionarily, that the value is in fact in the effort. They still have a fundamental detachment, Uranus, from the system. But in so doing, they develop revolutionary capacity, Uranus. The social geniuses of the times, the social revolutionary of the time, the person who revolutionizes something that they're focused on, that has the effect of leading things forward in new ways. People like Einstein. Yes? So, these people again have new vision, new insight. And when these people integrate into society with this vision, it always leads to the reality of Einstein's words, when genius interfaces with mediocre minds. Expect violent opposition. Why? You're challenging the consensus. Comprende? So, now this sets up moving into the spiritual state. 20% of any group is individuated. in these three possible stages. The spiritual state characterizes roughly 5% of the total population. This does not mean religion. Religion is in fact for the consensus, which is the basis of doctrines. We're right, they're wrong. Which of course then becomes the causal factor within the consensus of religious wars, or nationalisms, or the insanity of ethnic cleansing. Spiritual here means, in a true spiritual state, it means the individual has realized that there are many valid ways to spiritualize. There's not one size fits all. Any truly correct spiritual system of thought does not put down any other valid form of spiritual thought. Jesus taught 7 churches, the 7 candles. He's talking about the 7 natural ways to spiritualize, which correlate with the chakras. These spokes lead to the same goal. If you're finally at the goal, are you going to care what path you took? So in the very first stage of this development, and here again the primary emphasis astrologically is Neptune. In the very first stage of this development, the consciousness, which is now expanding through the psychology of detachment that was one and individuated, is now evolving to a situation of embracing the universal. The universal, or the transcendent. And these consciousnesses in this state are defined through the psychology of humility. Humility. Why? Because they now realize that they're teeny, small. It's like the one speck in sand out here on the beach. This will clearly create humility. You mean I'm not the cause of creation? Yeah. Spiritually speaking, it correlates with a discipline that is called bhakti yoga. Bhakti, which means devotional. Because of the psychology of humility. Typically, these will be people then that are found in ashrams, monasteries, following this spiritual teacher or that spiritual teacher. And in their own way, they will feel spiritually inadequate. Why? It's new. Once you create the psychology of inadequacy, you're creating the psychology of inferiority. Which then creates the awareness through comparison of those that are more spiritually evolved than yourself. Which then becomes the causal factor of following this one or this one or this one. Which is also the potential cause of following false teachings and false teachers. Meaning the real teaching here is to also exercise discrimination between a true teacher and teaching and that which is not. Because there's much that disagree, much is passed off as spirituality, but it's pure bullshit. Yes? Hello?
But, if you are in that state, cannot you distinguish between false teachers and...
It's a very simple realization that a truly God-realized soul and or teaching, the reality of the teacher is exactly the same as the teaching. There's no discrepancy. A truly God-realized soul only points the way home, not to themselves. And how many of these clowns out there are pointing their way, look at me, look at me. No.
Well, my point is, if you run out to a false teacher, you're not in the spiritual state either.
Oh, sure you are. It's part of the teaching in this state. Because by the time you get to the second stage, this real danger here. This can correlate with all the false spiritual teachers of our times, or any time. People who are having spiritual delusions of grandeur. They think they're bigger or more evolved than they are. Somehow they think they have a unique toehold on the truth. And they present themselves in this way. And examples of this, how many of you remember the spiritual clown called Rajneesh? Spiritual clown. The actual reality of Rajneesh's personal life versus what he taught was like night and day. His hook was his words. He was a Sagittarius man. He knew what words to say. And I think the thing that most graphically illustrates this, amongst many other graphic examples, is the fact that because people that are familiar with the clown, he had a very bad back. And one of the things he would do to treat his bad back is that he bought an extremely expensive dentist chair from England so that he could lay it in. And so he was in Oregon where he started this community called Rajneesh Purnam. And of course, in that situation, he was telling everybody to give him all their money, all their possessions, blah, blah, quack, quack. This is a form of spiritual devotion, he would say. And they ran around about 9 Rolls Royces. But the point here is that one day he was in a dentist's chair, and he had great pain in his back, and so one of the ways he would try to get out of this pain was through mainlining nitrous oxide, the stuff you can take it in a dentist's office to not feel pain. This is also a form of emotional truth serum. When this is in your body, you can't lie. And so here's the deal. This comes from a book written by his personal bodyguard of 10 years. He spent every single day with this man. And so here this man walks into this scene where he's laid out in his chair, mainlined oxide, and the words coming from the clown's mouth are as follows: "Thank God, I don't have to pretend to be enlightened anymore." False teacher. And there are many examples of this. Reverend Moon in Korea, who pretends to be a reincarnation of Christ, whose real intention is to take over the United States government. Clara Prophet, how many are familiar with Clara Prophet? Who always somehow has to change the date of the predicted Armageddon because it never happens. And in the very same way, all of her happy followers give her everything they own.
But then, what is so spiritual about the state?
Hmm?
We're still talking about these 5% spiritual states.
I'm sorry?
Then what is so spiritual?
Because it's all got this gloss or overstructure of spiritual words.
Okay. That's all.
Yeah. And I'm saying that there's many pitfalls in this state. The dominant dynamic is Neptune. The polarity of this thing is Virgo. You have to exercise discrimination. Many of the people calling themselves channelers nowadays are in fact in this condition. Simply ask yourself the question, why is it that this one's channeled message somehow conflicts with this one? The grossest case of this one is the woman in the U.S. called Ramtha. Ramtha. ZZ Knight. She actually channeled a message in the late 80s. Reagan is our savior. Reagan, President Reagan. Well, we can see the reality of this, huh? And once again, she's taken all the money of her followers and bought this great big giant castle and all these Arabian horses and This is God's will. So in this particular condition, at some point, the soul has a massive collapse. Because again, the underlying dynamic is humility. And in order for this spiritually deluded soul to have a realignment with reality, it requires a downfall. Just as Rajneesh had a downfall. And you know, this man happened to have 5 planets in Capricorn, all squared by Uranus retrograde in Aries. And when he was progressively sent from this country to this country, nobody wanting him, finally he goes back to India. And when the first Neptune transit hit that Capricorn point, heart attack. God took him out of here. Downfall. Emotional cataclysm. He was still a relatively young man. He was in his 50s. You know, that another gross example of his bullshit? Selling all this Tantra stuff. Trying to make money selling Tantra. And the very way he presented it was inherently wrong. How many remember the movie from Rajneesh Purnam called Ashram? Do everybody see this thing? So I'll take a minute just to show you how gross it is. There is a guru, yes, guru. This movie was made by one of his followers of Rajneesh Purnam, who finally became alienated and took it upon himself to expose the reality. So, first, amongst many things in the movie, is a scene where, because one of Rajneesh's great things is to sell Tantra. And what he would actually do in this Rajneesh Purnam place was put couples together who didn't even know each other to start with, at random. Yes, you do it with this one, and da-da, da-da. And also in a collective situation, no privacy. And so here's the scene. Here's this woman who is now having second thoughts. No, I should probably not be here. And here's this man who has an intention to do Tantra with this woman who is now resisting. He effectively creates a rape, forces it to happen. So her, she is screaming, she's being raped. And this man has all this, this is Tantra. And so in the movie, the scene shifts from this horrible scene to the picture of Rajneesh, and back, and back, and back. Do you understand the point now? False teacher. And see, when this community collapsed in Oregon, because I was doing much work in Seattle at that time, for 2 to 3 years, all I was seeing was the fallout from this community. People who had truly believed, sincerely believed. And then suddenly the disillusionment. That's also a reality in a spiritual state. And they were just crushed. How could this be? And all the counseling work that had to come. In so many ways, to deprogram. So, there's always going to be a downfall. Yeah.
Have you been there?
Was I ever there? No. Then it would never go there. I knew better. See, for myself, I've lived in traditional monasteries. Traditional. Things that have been in place for 4,000 or 5,000 years. There's a fundamental difference between this and somebody presenting this. I mean, there's obviously a difference between a Yogananda and a Rajneesh, or a Christ and a Rajneesh. So this finally leads into the last stage. And in this stage, you begin to have a true degree of God realization. There are 7 stages in such realization, by the way. And as you finally move into the last stage, you begin to have such realization, which progressively evolves, and you transfer from the first part of this stage and the sincere desire to be of service to a larger whole. The teaching now becomes one of karma yoga. Karma yoga, meaning the work vehicle is actually a vehicle through which you spiritualize. How? Why? The Godhead is working through you in such work. And in this way, the ego is realigned from the personality and is now defined in the context of its own creation. And it progressively goes all the way up into moving from spiritual teacher to guru to avatar. The difference between a guru and avatar is what? The teachings of a guru only affect a certain amount of people for a certain amount of time. An avatar's teachings survive their own life for thousands of years and continually affect more and more people over those thousands of years. As in Jesus, Buddha, Datsu, Ramakrishna, and so on. Natural stages in evolution. The last state is simply the state of what I call dimly evolved, meaning souls evolving into human consciousness from other forms of life. 5% or so of this state. These people are characterized by a very dim sense of self-awareness, a basic sense of occupying time-space. There's 2 types in this condition. In fact, the words you will know in modern society to describe this state are things like mental retardation, cretinism, the mongoloid syndrome, and the like. Now, there's 2 types in this condition. One type is a type that is, in fact, just evolving into this form of consciousness. And these people, when you look in their eyes, will have kind of a film over the pupil. Film. And they will be quite happy. Innocently happy. Why? They know no other experience. And the other type are souls being regressed through karmic calls into this condition. And the difference is you will see a white point of light coming from the pupil when you look in the eye. And these people will be, in varying degrees, very angry, to the point of being self-destructive. Why? They know different. And they are now experiencing the limitation of this condition. So these are the 4 natural evolutionary states. And you have to understand these states to understand the chart correctly. A Venus in Virgo in the 9th house is orientated to and actualized differently in a consensus state person than in an individuated state or spiritual state or dimly evolved state. And you cannot look at the piece of paper and know who's who. You have to do traditional astrology. Correlation, observation. The very first thing I do when a client comes to me is, what do you want? What do you want to know? What questions do you have? The very nature of their words will tell you at what evolutionary condition they are at. If I have a person coming to me and says, when can I expect my BMW? And the next one comes to me, when can I expect enlightenment? There's an observed difference. Now let's have a happy lunch. It's in it.
Yeah. Second one that we seem to be a bit unclear about.
Unclear?
Yeah.
That was the state where the ego becomes too spiritually full of itself. Remember all that? Okay. Creates the downfall. Any other question?
You discussed Pluto retrograde.
Yes.
How about Pluto stationary?
Yeah, on the
Can you
question.
tell something about that?
I mean, when it's not retrograde?
Pardon?
When you mean when it's not retrograde?
when it is stationary. So it,
Yes, but it can be stationary direct or
Yes.
stationary retrograde.
yeah, both. Could you tell something?
It magnifies the power of the condition. If it's stationary retrograde, it's like creating a double power on the retrograde archetype.
So it's an increased effect of retrogradation.
Mm-hmm.
In both cases, forward and backward.
Yeah.
I see.
Because from the point, if we look out from the sky, it is standing still there for a minute. Yeah? It's like boom. Oh. Any other question? It's been a long trip. We've already been on the road a long time. Okay, what I want to discuss now are exceptions to the happy rules. So now you have this little happy list of procedures, and now we have to make some exceptions, and these exceptions in fact reflect life. So as an example, in the condition you can have as an example Pluto conjunct South Node. You can have Pluto conjunct North Node. You can have Pluto square the nodal axis. You can have the planetary ruler of the North Node conjunct South Node and the planetary ruler of South Node on North Node. There's different variations here. And so, when you find Pluto on South Node, one of three evolutionary karmic conditions exist, the two of which will be extreme, not common, and the last of which will be quite common. The first condition is a situation wherein the soul has simply resisted the evolutionary intentions reflected in this house and sign of the Pluto South Node condition, and the related issues that are reflected in the planetary ruler of that South Node was located by house and sign. Refused, resisted, not done. And therefore in a karmic situation, it's a situation in this life in which the person is virtually forced to relive past life issues, dynamics, circumstances, and so on, in this life.
You're talking about Pluto conjunct South Node?
Yes, to relive. And here stands the North Node, yes? And this person will be extremely frustrated because they will sense in a kind of wistful way, in a nebulous way, a way out of these conditions. But because they have in fact resisted from past life the necessary lessons, they are now in a karmic situation of being literally forced to relive those conditions this life, and thus are blocked from the actualization of this North Node. Most people coming into any given life begin to become aware and thus to act upon the evolutionary intentions and lessons roughly around the first Saturn return. In this particular situation, they are karmically blocked, generally speaking, until the second Saturn return, which is going to characterize most of the life. The second situation is a situation wherein the soul has so thoroughly developed the issues, the dynamics, the conditions, and so on, reflected in the house and sign of the Pluto South Node and the location of its planetary ruler, and the motives have been sufficiently honest or pure that they are in a situation of karmic evolutionary fruition. They are bringing something special from past life into this life. And this person can be just as frustrated. They still want a way out. Why? They've already been doing this enough. They want to try something else. And in these conditions, there will always be a karmic signature that shows you why they are in this situation. This can also happen sometimes when you find the Sun conjunct the South Node. I mean, in the current life purpose, Sun is to bring something back from the past South Node.
The Sun Sun and the North Node you're speaking about now?
No, I'm saying Sun conjunct South Node.
And if the Sun is the ruler of the South Node, it's the same.
It can have this meaning, yes.
Yes.
The third condition is most common, to have an element of relive from a karmic view, reliving past life conditions that were resisted, and also an element of fruition. This is the most common reaction. Not too many people completely resist. This is not the common experience. Now also when you find planet or planets on South Node, this can also implicate one of these three conditions. As an example, in my very last life, I died in a situation of anger. Complete anger. As a little Indian boy killed by white people. So with a gunshot. So I died with anger. And died with anger at white people. And sure enough, Mars stands on my South Node. One of the very first things my mother told me I tried to do was rip my skin off. Mars on South Node. So I've clearly had lessons in this life that pertain to the nature of anger. Yes. Hand back here.
If you have, suppose Michael would
I can't hear.
what if this happens in synastry? If
Synastry?
synastry, if a physical and a South Node conjunction exists between two people, would the
One of these three conditions will exist between those two people as a unit. As a unit. It's a mutual karma. Combined karma. Uh-huh.
What if the Moon is on the South Node and Saturn on the North Node?
You have a situation.
No friend of mine.
No, I'm saying we have a situation. English uses this word a little bit differently. So, it's again a situation that pertain to past life conditions, Saturn on South Node in this case. One of those three conditions will be operative. I can't tell you which, the person is not in front of me. And the planet on the North Node, and prior to this life, has been working to break free those issues from the past. It's a lesson in progress. In fact, when you find a planet on North Node, it tends to decrease the amount of time necessary in those reliving situations. Typically, around the first Saturn square after the first Saturn square, around 36.
So it's accelerating?
Hmm?
You're saying if there's a planet in conjunction with the North Node,
No.
is it accelerating the process?
Yes, because it's occurred prior to this life. Now, when you find Pluto on North Node, this is a situation where that particular soul has been already working in this area of evolutionary metamorphosis prior to this life, and is meant to continue completely in this direction in this life. There's no polarity point.
And the same is true for the North Node in the 8th house? Would you say that?
If Pluto stands on it.
If the North Node is in the 8th house?
No.
No, it's
No.
a different
No,
thing.
no, no. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Does it apply also with the same house and sign, but not
It means that that's becoming close to being true. But it typically reflects as a gestational awareness prior to the life being lived. I can't hear you. There's still an implication that has to go back and forth. It's like a seesaw. Meaning there's still certain issues from the past that have not been clarified or thoroughly worked through. It's getting close to be. Yeah.
The planetary ruler of the north node only linked to the south.
We're getting there, please. Be patient. Now we have Pluto standing in square to the nodal axis. In evolutionary terms, this is called skipped steps. Skipped steps. Meaning the soul has been going back and forth, between the issues, conditions, circumstances, and so on, that are symbolized in both nodes, the houses, the signs, and the planetary rulers, by their own house and sign locality aspects for making. The person's been flip-flopping back and forth without thoroughly developing, completely developing either issue. They've been skipping steps. So that when you see this particular symbolism, it means in evolutionary terms they are karmically and evolutionarily required to recover those skipped steps before the future can truly be born, the new cycles. And the issue really, because in this case you have polarity point. And so one of the related issues is what? If this person's been flip-flopping, you're looking at a lack of integration. You're looking at two dynamics in their consciousness which are held in opposition, which are not integrated. And so the issue is also to achieve integration. So how to understand this problem, i.e. which node serves as the integration point that allows the polarity point and the skip steps to be recovered and move forwards. The way to answer this question is simply determined by understanding which node last formed a conjunction to Pluto, keeping in mind the mean motion of the nodes is retrograde. So as an example, if I have Pluto standing at 5 Leo, South node standing at 5 Taurus, North node standing at 5 Scorpio, which node last formed a conjunction with Pluto? It should be the North node in Scorpio. This will also hold true when you find planets, any planet, square the nodal axis of the moon. You still have the dynamic of skipped steps. You still have the karmic evolutionary requirement of having to recover something from the past. You still have the issue of what is going to be applied to create consistent integration. And again, you want to be looking to the node, the last formed in conjunction to the whatever the planet may be. These are unique conditions. You can have a situation wherein the planetary ruler of the North node is in fact conjunct the South node and vice versa. You have a situation here where the past feels like the future and the future feels like the past, that are being perpetually recycled. It's like being in a closed loop. But in this case, you're going to have a polarity point relative to Pluto. So what does it mean? It means that as the future and the past are recycled, they always meet at some point where the past and the future stands in the same moment. And a person is given a choice to break free from this cycle at that moment. And to break free is determined, seen through the polarity point of Pluto. And yet the person in this condition has to make a conscious effort to develop this point in order to break the loop. It will not happen of itself. So now think if you had this tool of astrology, and that kind of person came to you, all you've got to do is develop language/strategies that reflect this polarity point. And then tell the person, hey, you just have to make conscious choice. Typically in this kind of situation, a person will carry the psychology of victimization, feeling powerless to change anything. That somehow circumstances are larger than themselves. Yes? And so, any questions on these points? Clear?
No, not really. May I ask you again about what you told us just now about planetary rulers? For example, the ruler of the south node conjunct the north node.
Oh.
I didn't understand completely.
And does your question also mean the planetary ruler of the north nodes on south node, or just that the south node rulers on the north node?
The last one.
The last one. That they're bringing conditions from the past into this life in order to complete them. To complete them. Typically this person will have as an actual experience a sense of having two lifetimes in one. Where in the first part of the life they more or less are hypnotically fulfilling conditions from the past. It comes to culmination, and boom, they begin new cycle.
A general question on aspects out of sign but still within order in this respect. What is your opinion on that?
You have two archetypes to integrate. There's two different dynamics that are involved.
What about the ruler of the north and the south node being conjunct?
Conjunct.
Yeah,
Yes, where?
in Leo, 6th house.
And these are not in direct aspect to the nodal axis.
No.
Okay, her question is, what happens when you have the planetary rulers of the south and north nodes conjunct, but are not themselves an aspect to the nodal axis? Here again you have a situation because of the conjunction, that the past and future are coming together. Yes? The same sense of recycling, because they're conjunct. What you now have to determine is if it's a balsamic conjunction, like yesterday, or a new phase conjunction. They put it now in the context of this archetypal understanding. If it's in balsamic, then you see the whole issue of culmination. Culmination.
Isn't there some case?
Yeah. So it's a total culmination of an entire cycle that's preceded the current life in this life.
Is it possible that you can feel this very strong? Because at this very moment, Pluto is also conjunct my south node.
Yes, of course. This would be clearly one of the timing vehicles. Yeah. That's right. And in that situation, you would have an increasing sense that the whole cycle of your life and or any of the past life, which has been subconsciously conditioning, is now culminating. And within this sense, you will have an increasing sense of urgency, undefined urgency, emanating from the psyche to make fundamental change, not fine-tuning. And as this begins, the awareness of what to do will not be there. It'll just be this great inner urgency, sort of like a feeling of having a hand grenade in that steel box. And of course, in the last analysis, the hand grenade will win in such a way as to completely create new structure. It's an exciting time.
Sometimes feels like a volcano.
Yes, of course, Pluto. And see, one of the temptations I might add in this is to leap forwards too quickly. And one of the intentions, unless you want to have Pluto in South Node next life, is to take care of anything that can be characterized as loose ends from that prior cycle. Even when the temptation says, I'm done with it, I don't want to hear about it, you've got to complete these loose ends. So that this new cycle is now contaminated, Pluto, from the past cycle. Oh. Hello. Any more questions? So now let's examine the 4 ways that Pluto affects its evolutionary karmic requirements. 2 of which can be relatively cataclysmic or catastrophic, and 2 of which are relatively uniform. The most common way that we metamorphosize and grow and evolve is to, in fact, form a relationship to something that seems to symbolize to us something that we need, which in our own estimation we do not currently have. And by forming a relationship, a natural Plutonian osmosis takes place in which we extract into ourselves that which we have formed a relationship to. And in this way we have metamorphosized a limit of our existing reality. An example of this process is at some point in this life you have become interested in astrology. And by forming a relationship to astrology, you have osmosed it into your consciousness in such a way as to metamorphosize your existing structure of reality at a mental level or a philosophical level. And thus you have evolved. The most common way that all human beings do this is to form a relationship to another human being. Because typically in our relationship formations we are attracted to an individual who seems to represent something to us which we don't have, vice versa. We form a relationship, a Plutonian osmosis takes place, and we extract into ourselves, and then they, us, are mutual realities. Thus a metamorphosis of existing limitations in reality. For better or worse, I might add. You know, this is exactly one of the most common ways in which karma is exchanged, and this occurs in a typically Plutonian way, because in most of the intimate relationships we form, there's obviously going to be a sexual act. How many of you realize that one's karma and evolutionary background is contained in the sexual fluids? What happens when sperm and ovum unite? Through this mutual osmosis, it produces a third entity, yes? Called a baby. In a very similar way, as you osmose each other's sexual fluids, you are exchanging karma. Is it not true, as an example, for those you have slept with, that these folks or people are more deeply inside of you than those that you have not? And again, I would say for better or worse. And to me, this is the greatest argument for being sexually discriminate. That has nothing to do with religion. For those that we sleep with, we're in our own ways altering our own life path. Look at your life to understand this truth. Now happily, there is in fact a Plutonian ritual to free oneself from these effects if one wants to use it. To, in fact, in a deeper sense, to sever the karmic and biblical cord. How many would like to know this ritual?
Yes.
How many are too embarrassed to ask? That's what I thought. We're in Holland. In America, everybody raised their And so, I will tell you because I realize most of you are simply too shy. So, it's an ancient ritual from India. It stands here now 6,000 years. And it's called Agni, A-G-N-I, which means fire. All you have to do is visualize a fire in your third eye at the Christ center. If you can't do this yet, you make a flame candle in a dark room. And whatever images come to you, the people you're trying to be free of, you project these images into the fire until there's nothing left to project. And at the same time projecting forgiveness, not pie in the sky bullshit, but forgiveness from the point of view of accepting the responsibility in your own actions. Even if you can't see the causal factor in those actions in this life. You continue to do this until there's nothing left to project. At this point, you will feel psychically and emotionally more free, more clean, and again you will have severed the karmic umbilical cord. It is severing through the act of accepting the responsibility in your own actions. Now, if you remember the point, we normally form relationships with people that represent something to us that we need, which in our own estimation we don't have. And they us. This is one of the causal factors in the karma we call manipulation and use. Typically, especially in decades like this, people sustain their relationships only for the duration of the need that brought them into it. And once this need is satisfied, a new level of need appears, which the current partner does not seem to be able to meet. And lo and behold, Pluto would become attracted to someone else, who now seems to represent this need. Boom, boom. It's exactly through this dynamic that all souls at various points in their journey have experienced violations of trust, betrayal, abandonment. And of course the karma of manipulation and use. We all have Scorpio in our chart somewhere. We all have an 8th house, like it or not. Also, now most of the times this way of evolution is non-cataclysmic. For most of you, when you began to study astrology, it wasn't so cataclysmic, was it? So. Now another way Pluto affects its evolutionary karmic requirements, and this is now going to be a form of cataclysm, is at various points the soul can become overly identified with something. This can be a person, it can be a social position, it can be a kind of reality that is no longer allowing growth. The security or the dependency linked with these situations prevents the necessary growth. And at these key moments, it creates a situation of loss. It's what I call the rug being removed from the feet. Unexpectedly, like this. And of course, this kind of loss, enforced loss, or enforced change that it upsets your whole life, can clearly be cataclysmic. And the key point, over-identification, to the point where you're not allowing yourself to grow. You're trying to desperately maintain something at all costs. Just as Nixon tried to desperately maintain his presidency, which then created emotional dishonesty and deception. Keeping in mind this man had a 10th house Pluto. Aha. Polarity point being 4th house. His whole sense of identity was linked with the social position, 10th house. And the evolutionary growth is learned to see himself completely stripped of power, Pluto. And to learn to find a new source of security, a new self-image, 4th house. And amazingly enough, when Watergate happened in the US, Pluto was exactly transiting Nixon's south node. Now, is this coincidence or synchronicity? And just like in your case, a whole past cycle for him culminated. Pluto's south node. Lifetimes of his over-identification with social position. And then clearly Nixon did not make a conscious choice to invite impeachment. It was forced Pluto. Another way Pluto affects its evolutionary necessities is at key points in one's journey that one can become aware of latent abilities or capacities. Latent, that which is inherent but not aware of. And at key points this becomes released out of the unconscious to the current personality. Acted upon, it generates metamorphosis of existing reality. An example, when Carter decided to run for president, Pluto was transiting his sun. And this is typically non-cataclysmic for most people. Actually, it generates a sense of excitement. The last way, which is also cataclysmic, at certain points in one's journey, in certain lives, one becomes increasingly aware, Pluto, that you're stagnating, that life seems to be stopping. They're in a rut, they're in a box, they're not growing. The sense of stagnation. Now, the awareness of stagnation does not presume the awareness of cause. They're aware of the effect, not affect. When this occurs, the consciousness will begin to naturally invert, to withdraw from the existing circumstantial reality. The intention in the withdrawal is to become aware of cause. Cause. Yes? And the withdrawal from existing circumstantial reality can become catastrophic. Why? They are progressively disengaging from their current reality, the commitments, the responsibilities, the obligations, the things they have created to this point in time. And as the disengaging or the withdrawal from these circumstances occurs and intensifies, that which they have created begins to collapse. The worst form of this situation in psychological terms is called catatonia. Catatonia. To become catatonic. Totally paralyzed in the form of consciousness, which reflects itself also in bhakti in certain cases. And we did a case a while ago with a very successful banker person, and had it all. Great rich house, happy wife, 4 kids, a Jaguar, bank credit cards, charged to the max. Great prestige. Progressively it held no meaning. He begins to withdraw. The children are going, where's Papa? The wife's going, where's my husband? The people in the bank, where's this guy working here? He's not paying bills. Pretty soon it's all gone. This is catastrophic. Now these 4 ways can interact. As an example, you may become aware of a latent capacity. And you might make the choice that, yes, I would like to actualize this. But in this choice, it might now make you aware of existing circumstances in your life that are blocking it. You see that point? These things can...
But where did Pluto was in that horoscope? In what situation?
What's the question?
You tell this story, but in what situation was Pluto, or the north or the south?
South Node.
South node.
Because an entire cycle is trying to culminate. And to the extent that he resisted allowing it to change, keep it in mind, Pluto does in fact again correlate to resistance to change. So really what you had in that particular case, he just didn't have the courage to change. And the only way he could change was to withdraw. Inwardly withdraw. And he finally came and saw the counselor of last resort, the astrologer. He'd seen everybody else. Nobody could explain why. Oh, look at your life, it's great, what you did it. And they were giving him the opposite advice of what he needed. So finally he staggers into the astrology office, and so we gave him some good advice. Now most of you in this room again can see these four natural ways that Pluto affects its requirements in one way or another. These are universal experiences. And again, Pluto or astrology can only reflect life. It cannot cause it. You see, this is one of the great arguments that the consensus scientist uses to invalidate astrology. And it's the basis of the argument rooted in cause and effect. Astrology is a symbolic language only. Even Moses, by the way, who was a great astrologer. You know what, a quote from Moses? Astrology is simply the symbolic language of God. What a nice way to put it. So any questions on these natural four ways?
Can I ask you something about the ritual?
Hmm?
The fire you were talking about. Can I ask you something about that?
The Agni thing?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
It does not feel good for me to have a sort of meditation situation in which you put the images of the people that are not nice to you in a fire.
Why? Fire is a purifying element.
But also destructive.
Huh?
Destructive.
It depends on your point of view. You can use the word destruction and you're helping this person destroy perhaps negative elements in their own consciousness. And they're allowing them to purify. The operative dynamic is forgiveness. If this is the operative dynamic, tell me how something wrong can occur here. Also. Especially if you're accepting responsibility in your own actions. You're not creating blame. You're not doing something that's motivated by vindictiveness. If that's the motive, then I agree with you. And by the way, in that motive, it will come right on back. So that part will come back to you. It all comes down to intention. This is what God judges, by the way, is our intentions, not necessarily outcomes. Now, the transit of Pluto simply reflects one's evolution. Pluto transit is somewhere in your chart now. And to understand the transit of Pluto, you simply always have to refer it. It goes all the way back to where we started. The underlying karmic evolutionary dynamic in the chart. What the soul's trying to accomplish in this life. So wherever this Pluto transit is must be related to the natal point and the polarity point, the nodal axis, when you throw in the transits of the south and north node. Wherever those transits are, because the key word in Pluto is metamorphoses. So wherever you find this transit is trying to metamorphosize some existing definition, structure, or limit in your reality. To change it, evolve it, expand it, to grow beyond it. In order to do this, sometimes the soul recreates circumstances of the past. To bring them to culmination, to force the issue. Pluto transits not necessarily happy experiences. Especially when you understand the four ways that Pluto affects its evolutionary karmic requirements. When you're in an active Pluto transit, you generally have about a 5-year range that is operative. The intensity of the transit is condensed within 18 months. That it lies in the middle of this 5-year arc. As an example, going back to Nixon, Watergate exactly had an 18-month life. And this is when Pluto was exactly conjunct. exactly conjunct. Nixon South Node. Wherever you find, yes?
And that occurs at the beginning of that 18-month period, or is it exactly in the middle of
It began, because I'm talking again about a 5-year range. And for Nixon, the first 4 years is when he was president for his first term. And then they began the re-election campaign. Yes? And it's right here that the Watergate thing began. Because his alter egos, he had South Node and Libra. So he had all kinds of alter egos, Halderman, Ehrlichman, yes men, that were so invested in their own need for power that they wanted to make sure he himself was re-elected. Which then became the causal factor in the Watergate break-in and all this plutonian espionage and so on and so forth. So when it finally became public, Libra, 18-month life. It's clockwork. Where you have the transiting south and north nodes, again you have to refer where the current transits of these 2 points are in your chart to your natal south node and north node to understand what the ongoing issues are that are helping you evolve from that natal imprint. Yes? And then you have also collective application. Right now we're all going through the fact that North Node's now in Scorpio, right with Pluto, and of course the South Node's in Taurus. To understand these specific underlying issues, locate where the current planets are that rule these points. In Taurus's case, it's Venus. Venus is just now going to Aries. And at this point, Pluto stands with its own sign on North Node. You can put this in your individual chart to see exactly the contents of your immediate moments. That which is most here in your brain, right in your face. In a typical Platonian way, you are given choices. And if most of us tend to make choices, again, that reflect our past. When we do this is exactly why the Pluto transit can be so difficult. Resistance to necessary change breeds cataclysmic events. Questions on these points? Seems perfectly clear? Painfully so.
What if transit Pluto is square to the natal nodes?
Then you're recovering something from the past. There's an element of skip steps here. And it will be directly found in the house that Pluto itself is transiting. Yeah?
And if it's trine then in North Node?
Which implies sextile to South Node. Yes?
Yes, sextile south.
That means that something you have to again always refer to what's come before, evolution. And this would tend to mean that the person prior to this point has made choices to support the ongoing evolution that now come into fruition. It's like a process suddenly going, aha, yep, oh, yep, mm-hmm. And now they can integrate it. It's an integration aspect. More questions? Now we get into some new material here. And I think the underlying title we can make, the subtitle to this stuff, is of course a transference between from karma to Dharma. So once again, I don't know why, but every time I come to Holland or the Netherlands, that somehow something new always comes out. And, maybe in my relocation chart it explains I become double Pisces here. Yes? Which I think your Netherlands chart has Pisces rising. No? we won't. Okay. So this is fine. Okay. So yeah, we're now going to engage this debate. No. So the first point I want to make to illustrate these new ideas is that to reiterate the point that again, the universe in our solar system as we experience at this time still has a natural law of polarity or duality. And you have seen so far today that in these happy astrological methods to determine evolution, that we are clearly demonstrating there is in fact a way to understand how things can change, grow, evolve. We have demonstrated this through polarity points. The polarity point of Pluto, of course the polarity point of South Node is a North Node. Yes? Okay. When you look at a birth chart, once you understand this underlying dynamic, then you can do something else. And again, here the law of polarity. Every planet in its own house and sign, natally, has its own polarity point. Every birth chart, natally, in other words, every natal planet is going to have its own polarity point. Yes? If these polarity points of each planet have a conscious intention, meaning if you make a conscious intention, it's not going to happen of itself, to understand what the polarity point means for each planet, you are breaking the chain of karma, the shackle, the box, the loop, and you begin to now embrace the future in such a way that the future can define itself as the future. Not a future that is a reflection of recreating the past. You understand this core idea? The point, it takes conscious intention. As an example, let's say in this case, we've got a fourth house Pisces moon receiving square from Uranus in 8th, Mars in Sagittarius in 2nd, and of course now impacting on Pisces moon. Now from a purely karmic situation or evolutionary necessity point of view, either way, you can clearly see that this individual has probably been psychologically damaged in their early environment, in all likelihood to the mother. Yes? This is hard for anybody to see. It could be very, very easy for such an individual to simply hang out with their emotional childhood wounds for an entire lifetime. they can become so wounded and so psychologically damaged that they never allow themselves to emotionally mature. Meaning they can perpetually use such damage as excuse or reason not to get it to grow up. And in this pattern, perpetually recreate their past in order to sustain the rationalization. To not do so. Now if we flip-flop this thing, it will now look like that. Do you see it? And now what you have is what? The moon shifts from here to here. The T-square focuses to here. The Mars goes to 8, Uranus goes to 2nd. What is the actual transference here? How does this reflect breaking karmic chains from the past? In the first scenario, via the wounds demonstrated here and here and here, the person could attempt to recreate in their adult life adult partnerships that had the effect of keeping the person here. Somebody come and take care of me. Somebody come and heal me. Because my mother didn't. That's an example of displaced emotions coming into adult life. And so in effect you're looking to someone else to heal them. Once you turn this around and put Uranus here, Mars here, Moon here, the person is now taking the responsibility to heal themselves. They're becoming self-determined. 10th house. Yes? And thus emotionally maturing and or growing up. But putting Uranus back down into here, they're taking charge of their own healing. By putting Mars here, they're breaking a new cycle. The cycle now occurring in the 8th house. You understand the point? The person can stop now being a child and move into the world. If that person had natural healing capacity, which they probably would based on the wounds they themselves have experienced, that's going to create a natural psychological consciousness.
But how can you change it?
Hmm?
How can you change it? The person is born with the other situation.
That's your past speaking. Right there. How can? And the answer to your question is exactly in these symbols. This is how. Everything can operate through polarity. The key point again, conscious effort. It will not happen by itself. Now when you work with these ideas, I would suggest you sustain the existing zodiac, whatever the current rising sign is, and so on and so forth. Not a total flip-flop.
Just the planets.
Yeah. Because still you're going to have, in this way of doing it, Pluto's still in the house of birth that it came into. You have the polarity points, the transference and the axes, and so on. And you've now simply evolved through developing the polarity points of each point in relationship to the underlying dynamic which is reflected by Pluto. Polarity point, now north and south nodes and so on. Do you understand the basis of this? Take a moment to reflect. Yeah.
What's not absolutely clear is would you have to apply it to all the planets in the chart or only to the T-square or the polarities?
All planets.
All planets.
Evolution occurs through embracing that which it is not. Karma is sustained by re-embracing that which was. And this is why it takes a conscious effort. Now take a few moments to reflect on your own case here. Is that laughter of recognition? No. Huh?
One of resistance.
Awesome.
It's funny, some things I have done recently. Some of these things I have done recently.
Just in your intuition.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because we're moving to a new age.
Yeah. I'm very surprised. Of course, I felt that as a very moment, hey, I'm already doing this.
Yeah. This is an example of your consciousness responding to the new age. And the thoughts just are coming by themselves. Right. Quiet, please. Shh. Quiet, please.
Which happens by Venus in Libra. Venus in Libra
Yes.
isn't its own sign. It may be helpful for us to overcome your north nodes, south nodes problems. If you smoke everything, it can be less again. You know what I mean? If the planet is very in balance in its sign, may it stay there. Is it
Now we've had in one sentence a perfect illustration of the whole deal.
I mean, you have always helping forces in the daytime as well. All the problems there.
The simple answer to the question, evolution never stops. And it's not, I think what you're assuming is that you're leaving behind something. And this is not the case. You're allowing it to evolve in relationship to the natal signature. Why have, if you have Venus in Libra, why make the assumption that somehow the state of balance that you're speaking of is going to be changed? Can't the balance itself be expanded? Also, yeah.
When you're analysing the polarity points for each planet, you take the opposite signs into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like the polarity point of Pluto and so on, you can, in your case, use the astrological symbol, whatever it is, mandala, Sabian symbols. Yeah. Now, for those that could take a few moments to reflect on your own case, could you just begin to see how this could work? Not expecting instant recognition, but just how it could work. Yes?
Yeah, it seems a little fearful sometimes.
Of course. Anytime we embrace a brand new thing, what's the natural reaction? Oh. That's Pluto. God, I've just become secure. What do you mean you're telling me these things?
I still have the feeling that even if you take all the counterpoints, the polarity points in a horoscope, could the use of it be?
Could
Could the use of it be in astrological praxis that it could help the astrologer to advise better to the other person what the totality of the future will be or could be?
Yeah.
Because you have an all integrated effect and not just one.
Yeah. Because now it becomes like an image of putting that famous carrot in front of the horse. And if you can hold out a promise like that, especially for those that are in great pain in their life, and you have again the words, try this, there's nothing to lose except pain. Now here's the wild card in all of this. Do you know how Americans use the word wild card?
Sports event?
Huh?
Just a sports event?
No. No, because that was quite a hit. What I'm about to share goes right back to the notion of the Trinity. Each planet has its own nodal axis. Saturn will have a south and north node. That's Saturnian. Neptune does, and so on and so forth. It goes right back to the notion of Trinity. Moon has south node, north node, Trinity. An integration factor. And so what you can see, because the phenomena of past life is incredibly complex. It is incredibly complex. And too many or some astrologers who try to, it's like some of these books that are written, Karma and the Birth Charts and so on and so forth. It's like knowing about 5% of the picture. Past life is an incredibly extensive and complex dynamic. I mean, it's hard enough to understand the dynamics in any one life, let alone the combination of dynamics spread over countless lifetimes. And there are, in fact, ways, if you really want to get into it, via the role of astrological detective, of understanding exactly the complexity of these issues. There are ways to see them in the birth chart. But relative to the state of our evolution, it's too big. The glass can only hold so much water. And if you start putting more water in it, it just flows over. It's wasted. But now that we're on this beginning into the Aquarian age, and it has, in fact, time to expand the limit of the cup, and meaning the actualization of new dendrites in our brain. If you want, I can show you astrologically how this complexity is symbolized. How many are ready for this journey? How many have had enough and want to go have that beer in the pub? The complexity is simply symbolized in the fact that each planet has its own nodal axis. And there are, in fact, I think some astrology programs, computer, and I know of one book, actually, that has an ephemeris of the different planetary nodes and how to calculate these things mathematically in past and forwards.
You mean the draconic?
What?
The draconic, that you have for instance, the sun, and then you take the north node and you have draw it off. That you go so many places back.
What's it called? Draconic.
Diminishing, yeah. To diminish the,
I've never heard of this thing.
The north node from the, you don't mean that?
No, it's just because ask yourself the question, what in the world is a node and how do you mathematically determine it? It's only really an abstract point in space. It's not a physical body. It is simply based on the ecliptic and the planetary orbits over the ecliptics, north and south. That's all it is. So, relative to each planet's orbit, relative to the ecliptic of the Earth, relative to the Sun, you have nodes. And each one has its own north and south node. Again, we're reflecting the law of the Trinity. So, if you, say, take the example of south node of Saturn, and you're going to have a north node of Saturn, and you're going to have a natal Saturn. Here again, we've got the key point, a polarity point. The Saturn, in this case, would have a natural polarity point. So, just like Pluto, you're looking at the transition of Saturnian dynamics as defined in the past, where they're trying to evolve to in a Saturnian way in this life, south and north nodes relative to the polarity point. It's an example to show you how graphic this can be. What if a person had Capricorn on the third house? We would not normally think of such a Capricorn on the third house as a natural poetical thinker, would you? Capricorn in itself is not going to lend itself to allegorical thinking on the third house. It's going to want to have much more of a defined structure. 1 + 1 = 2, etc. And, however, what if you happen to find, say, the south node of Neptune in the third house, in Capricorn? This is my point. You can have a client come into you and you would say that, and through traditional astrology, you saw Capricorn sitting there. You're not going to think to yourself, oh, this is a natural allegorical thinker, or a metaphorical thinker, or a person that thinks in parable. You're just not. You're going to tend to think that their mental element of their consciousness is highly defined, structured. Yes or no? And yet now if you find the south node of Neptune sitting in that house, you see my point now. That in fact how they structure their consciousness in a Capricorn way is defined through the south node of Neptune. That is their structure. This is my point about trying to understand the complexity of past life. No astrologer is going to look into that house in this way. In fact, almost 99% of astrologers don't put such nodes in such charts. It's just not done. And the reason is that once you start doing these things, you have to expand your consciousness. And most of us have trouble just with those few symbols. Let alone now trying to integrate and synthesize all this stuff. You understand my point? What if, as an example, if you want to start looking into a past life from an astrological detective point of view, you saw a person whose natal Neptune This is perhaps in Libra, in the 11th house. And yet the nodes for Neptune, let's say one's in Capricorn in the 3rd house, and the other's in Cancer in the 9th house. You're clearly demonstrating a T-square between its own nodes. Yes or no? Now, from a past life point of view, if you embrace those symbols, it would not be a far stretch to understand that this person's probably had a series of prior lifetimes of spiritual religious persecution via the authorities or powers of the times. And that as a result of this sort of persecution and excessive systems judgment, the person probably went into the 11th house, i.e., probably began to form or find himself in relationship to, Libra, like-minded people who are forming communities, spiritual type communities, that were being established to withstand the forces of persecution. Aha. You see the point? Now, after the break, we'll go into this a little bit more. So. Okay. Now, who has questions? Yeah.
You would still tell us what the ruler was of the south node. I told about the ruler of the north node, that was Pluto, and you still would tell something about the ruler of the south node.
Which south node? The one now, transiting Taurus? Which one are you talking
You were
about?
talking about a half an hour ago about the ruler of the north node, which was Pluto. And then there was a question asking what I'm asking now. What's the ruler of the south node?
Just now? Venus.
Venus.
Yeah. The south node's in Taurus.
I have a question too. What use can be to be aware of like the details of a past life? Because you just told it's really complex. I understand. What's the use of knowing all these things? The moon and the past?
The only real reason to even understand past life is not so much detail as in the sense of name and date and this bullshit, but to understand the dynamics that we all bring forward into any life, any moment. again, the past is forever shaping the moment, as the way that time-space, relative to existing consciousness, this epoch, is currently evolved into. This is the only reason. An example, take a typical case. This mother and father came to me and they had a child, and the child at this point was 6 years old and was still wearing a diaper. Refused to go to the bathroom a normal way. And of course the parents are properly concerned. They have no way of understanding why this is so. They took the child to this doctor and that. Doctors don't know. And of course the child had been given all the love that it needed by these parents. They were very loving parents. They'd been nurtured in proper ways and so on. And so there was clearly no rational basis, no logical basis, from this life's point of view of understanding what's happening here. Here is the case where understanding past life dynamics is vital and to helping this child change. As it turned out, the child had south node in 8th house, the south node in the 8th house. Conjunct several planets, I can't remember all the planets, and the point is that the child had experienced a series of abandonments and betrayals and so on and so forth in many recent lifetimes, and therefore had an incredibly intense fear of loss. So the symbol of the diaper to the child was what? What was the symbol of keeping the diaper on from the child's point of view?
Afraid to let go.
Exactly. Afraid to let go, afraid of losing something. And so, and in that particular setting I could share with the parents the specific dynamics that were in fact involved, not just the dynamic, but what caused it. And so in this particular case, once the parents could understand this, and you should have seen the level of relief. Here's somebody that can tell me what's actually happening. Again, the counselor of last resort, yes. Stumbled into the office, many doctors later, thousands of dollars later. They fork out their $100 to the counselor of last resort. And it was correctable in a very simple way. And in this particular case, I simply told the parents all they had to do was wait till the child was asleep at night, and then to put in simple suggestions via the right ear when the child was asleep, and to affirm to the soul that it was in fact loved, that nothing would happen like that in this life, that they would be there for the child no matter what. And I told them if they did this consistently, you could anticipate instant change within 2 weeks. And that's exactly what happened. They came back in 2 weeks later, and of course I was now perceived as God. But, so this is in fact a reason to understand past life dynamics. There's much in a given life that cannot be rationally or logically explained from this life's point of view. In my own particular case, I've had certain lifetimes where there's been massive persecution by large groups of people. And there's a natural fear in me or resistance even dealing with groups of people. When I've got Neptune standing in the 11th, was squaring Capricorn in 3rd, North Node in Cancer in 9th. And believe me, when I became aware in this life that God wanted me to do just what I'm doing now, you can imagine my reaction. Because I have conscious awareness in my past lives. And yet to get over this particular fear, you have to confront it. It's the homeopathic principle of like curing like. And so here I sit. Hello. Any other questions? Yeah?
When you're looking at the polarity of a planet to determine the key towards your Dharma, what if there's another planet there? What does it suggest?
It's just like in the case we illustrated with Pluto and an Earth node. It means that particular function has been trying to move that other function forward. Yes? In this case, you're going to have an opposition. Yes. So here again, you see an interweaving between the past and the future relative to those specific dynamics. Any other questions? Do you find that this all relevant to your own life and or work? You see that there can be some practical applications of all these happy ideals. Yes? Yes. Good. And so, now for those that do want to work with the planetary nodes, i.e. the nodes of the other planets, to my knowledge there's only one book that has an ephemeris in it that lists them and also provides a mathematical formula to determine whether they have been beyond the range of the ephemeris. And in other words, I think it covers from 1930 to 1985 or something. Anyway, this book is called the Node Book, written by Zipporah Dobbins. Dobbins. D-O-B-Y-N-S. The Node Book. Now, for those that get this book, all you should be focusing on is the ephemeris section, because the first part of the book, if you read her ideas, you'll probably go crazy. And the reason is that she's trying to change the very tradition of astrology itself, in the sense that somehow the North Node is supposed to be the past, and the South Node is supposed to be the future. So just dismiss this section of the book. And to my knowledge, I don't know if there's an astrology program, computer one, that actually does this yet.
I'm pretty sure that Matrix.
The Matrix?
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
I have this program though, and to my knowledge, huh?
Which one?
Blue Star?
Should be in there. I'm pretty sure.
No, I know it does, of course, the South and North nodes.
Because I've done Kepler as well as Matrix, and it's one of the two of them.
God, I've used this program for years, and it's not something that's on their menu. No, it's maybe it's some way to manipulate the program. Huh?
It's one of the internal options. You can either turn off or turn on.
Huh?
We can publish the current positions in the next astrophrase.
Cool. That's a good promo for Taze, so so it is, all I'm trying to say by way of suggestion, it is something you might want to look into, because it will answer certain questions that otherwise could not be answered. So, now in the last section of this day, what I would like to talk about are these ideas in reference to relationships, as in composite charts, synthesis charts. Would you like to do that? Everybody's eyes snap with it. Let's first understand the difference between synastry charts and composite charts, because they're two different things. synastry charts simply reflect the dynamics that exist between two people as distinct individuals. Whereas composite charts are the dynamic that exists within a relationship as a unit, a couple. It's like a third entity. An example, if you had in synastry, one person's Pluto is scoring another person's Venus. The Pluto person would always be the Pluto person. The Venus person will always be the Venus person. If you had a Pluto square Venus in a composite chart, both people can be Pluto-Venus depending on circumstance. You see this difference? Another way to know this is that most of you have probably been in more than one intimate relationship. It's the nature of our times. And we all carry an essential nature. So you can be in a relationship to person X, hers your essential nature, hers their essential nature, it comes together and it creates a composite relationship. This relationship's now over. Here's your essential nature standing here again, new partner. Their essential nature. This is now different than the last relationship. You see my point? This is what composite charts are reflecting. Now, from a composite chart point of view, where you find a combined Pluto, house sign, is simply demonstrating the combined desires that these two people have had prior to this life, that have defined the essence of their journey that has come before, together. As an example, if you had two people in an individuated state, the both of them were, and they have now a composite ninth house Pluto, what do you think has brought them together before? What are the combined desires? What is defining the essence or the foundation of that relationship? Is it not going to be ninth house issues here? Combined desires relative to metaphysical pursuit of natural truth. Do you see the point? And that couple, when they come together in this life, will pick up right there. We all pick up where we left off as individuals, and wherever the relationship is left off, i.e. composite Pluto, the two people will pick it up right there. And just, yeah.
When in the composite of two people there is the composite Sun conjunct composite Pluto.
Composite something conjunct Pluto.
Sun conjunct Pluto.
South?
Sun.
Sun. Ah.
Does that mean that the relationship was in life prior to this?
You cannot know this from an astrology view. You again have to do observation. An answer is also this: 90% of the relationships we have with whomever in the life that we live, we have known in some way before. In some way. Not always marriage partner. And the reason for this goes back to the principle of evolution. It tends to take more than one life to work out whatever the dynamics are between you and whomever. On the other hand, you always have to meet somebody for the first time sometime. And this will characterize roughly 10% of our meetings in a given life. Now, the simplest way to know when you have known somebody before is you will know it. You have an inner reaction. There's a certain sense of familiarity that's not readily defined. So there are cases, I mean, who's not had an experience in this life wherein you're just walking through some place or some situation, some circumstance, and suddenly there's a person in front of you that you have for unknown reasons, an absolute reaction of fear or revulsion, or some reaction trying to generate a flight or escape, wanting to get away. This is an extreme example at this point. So, just as an individual chart has a polarity point, so too with the composite chart. This is the next step for the couple. The number one thing on your list, to analyze the composite chart. The composite chart is also going to have a south node. This is the combined ego of the two people. The image of that the relationship has for itself. Think of these words. The image that the relationship has for itself. Maybe two individuals come together and individually they have an individual sense of the profession of healing in some way. And now these two people come together and they have a combined desire that is harmonious and mutual. This now constitutes the image or ego of the relationship. Oh, we can do this work together. This is how we're seeing our relationship. To see is to create an image. So from a past life point of view, wonder if this is Rajneesh. And or one of his followers, uh-oh. The south node in the composite chart, just like in the individual chart, demonstrates how the couple has actualized the desires inherent in the composite Pluto, to make them conscious, to create a relationship image, a mutual contract, a mutual agreement. And like the individual, they gravitate to this thing before. Again, this thing has a planetary ruler. This shows you how the south node itself in the composite chart was actualized. In the first part of the class, we were using the example of the 9th house Pluto, south node, 7th, ruler, and 4th house. We showed you in the consensus state that this could be an individual who took their belief structures or religious patterns, what they think about, directly from their family of origin. Now let's make this a couple who's also in a consensus state. Now you can see that the couple itself is using the family. You see my point? As the primary teacher. Could be a classic example of two people being born into Mormon parents in the state of Utah in a consensus condition and simply following in their footsteps. Yes? So like in the individual chart, we of course have polarity point. We have north node, we have the location of its planetary ruler. These all demonstrate the next evolutionary step for the couple. You want to consider the amount of aspects Pluto is making and so on. Understand at what level or at what phase in the evolutionary arc of aspects the Pluto aspects are taking place within. This is vital to know. It's an example where if you dealt with a composite chart, it goes back to Pluto square Venus. And let's say that this is a brand new aspect, or it's just occurred in the last life maybe. And what you can read into this is a situation where these two people have been overly proximate, together too much. That what's been occurring here is that they've learned to only trust themselves to the exclusion of other people. That there's an implied mutual threat with both of them. The threat being linked to other people based on violations of trust or emotional betrayal. And that they've learned to come together in a very close, intense way to help each other in psychological, emotional ways to sort this stuff out. And they've learned to just trust themselves to the exclusion of other people. And this is now breeding an excessive codependency. Pluto, Venus. And now here comes the square. Meaning in evolutionary terms, they have to learn square to separate a little bit, to create some breathing room. We have to understand that Venus has a linkage to Taurus, not just Libra. There's an inner nature of Venus. The inner nature or Taurian side of Venus is to learn its form of self-sufficiency, self-reliance. To learn how to identify and meet one's own needs. Not just compulsively projecting upon the partner all the time, which is the basis of codependency. And so here comes now this evolutionary lesson of learning to separate to accomplish this. Given what's come before, this is automatically going to ignite fears within the relationship. Uh-oh, if we begin to separate, I might lose you all over again. You see my point? And the square then can be responded to in a resisting way, Pluto. Now that I see this fear, I'm going to try to overly secure it. Which is only going to enforce a separation because of evolutionary necessity. Versus the couple now coming into you and you can say, look here. Here's what your souls are trying to accomplish together. And thus precluding the necessity of the severity of some emotional, catastrophic event. Can't you see that this is a priceless insight for these people? No traditional psychologist can do this. That's the uniqueness of astrology.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it also possible that this couple face the fear to lose each other? They face the fear to lose each other and they can go developing further on?
I'm sorry?
Is it also possible that they can go developing together as a couple if they are able to face the fear?
That's the point. That's the entire point.
I mean, they don't have to.
That's the point. If they cooperate with the intention behind the aspect, it precludes the severity of the cataclysm. This is the point. And so, we have to accommodate the Plutonian aspects. We have to understand at what range in the evolutionary arc the aspects take place. This is the point here. Now, for those that want to get really adventurous, you can now throw in the polarity points to all the planets. And even more adventurous, now throw in the planetary nodes. Yes, that is a big job. Now in synastry, we have entirely different issues. Because again, the core point, the dynamics that are existing between two people is distinct individuals. We said in the morning that your entire generation's Pluto through synastry lands in your natal Pluto. And again, this has the effect of stimulating the separating desire to separate from the generation to discover who you are as an individual within it, which has the effect of enforcing the polarity point. Yes? So that's the first thing to acknowledge. Now, in synastry, there are certain rules that will help you determine, understand some of the complexity of past life. Some. As an example, if somebody else has planets on your south node, this is clearly an example that something has preceded the current life. Some dynamics have occurred, the nature of which are determined by the nature of the house and sign that your south node is in, and the nature of the planet of the other person that is conjuncting that south node. Typically, as an example, if you find somebody's Pluto on your south node, they can create two reactions: attraction and repulsion. Hello. It's true.
I suppose there's things with more attraction.
Yes, yes. Another thing to look for is, in fact, the planetary rulers, if each individual south node, an aspect through synastry. If so, does past life connection.
The aspects of the
Each individual's south nodes, in aspect to themselves. Now, in this case, because first of all, the nature of the aspect between the two planets, it's either can be stressful or non-stressful. That gives you your first clue as to the possibilities that's occurred before. And then you have to, of course, in synastry, locate where these planetary rulers are landing in each other's charts. The house and sign, the nature of the planets. This is giving you information. And of course, because of the nature of this contact, you have to now look at the mutual placement of each other's south nodes in each other's charts. Layer upon layer upon layer of information, demonstrating past life contact / dynamics. Yes? When you find the nodal axis in each other's charts in some aspect to themselves, it can be square, then yes, there's been past life contact, but unless the planetary rulers of these two nodes are in some sort of aspect, then it is not specifically personal. It is typically a situation where you've gone through some mass event together of an intense nature. An example would be the gypsies or the Jews and Hitler's insanity. It can be an example of X amount of people surviving a hurricane together, and so on. You have to remember the nature of catastrophic events brings people to closer quickly. You know, I survived the Vietnam War, and when you're in a Vietnam War type situation, really, there's no time for bullshit. You tend to get to know the person next to you pretty quickly, because you're in concentrated, condensed time. And so when you find these kind of nodal relationships and aspects, this is what tends to be symbolized. When you put these things in each other's charts, you can now begin to understand what the nature of the events were. Yes? And so there's all kinds of rules, but they get progressively more complicated. And this is exactly now why I'm writing the second volume of Pluto. Because all these rules will be in there. And they're all based on my direct experience. I've worked with over 15,000 people. It's born out of experience not just theoretical bullshit. Huh?
We're still waiting a year.
When's it going to come out?
Next year, you said. Last year.
Well, the English version should be out hopefully by the end of the year. When it becomes translated to Dutch, well, call up Mr. Shore and ask him. Because I actually, when we were in Hamburg and we were doing this lecture in more detail, I tried to put out all the rules. But as it became more complex, because there's so many variations, which is a reflection of life. And at a certain point, you could see the springs coming out of the brains. So we had to stop. But there are many, many rules, and each one is relevant because it is born out of experience. And again, the reason to understand these sorts of things is to understand what has come before, that in its own way subconsciously conditions our approach to another person. You know, it's not uncommon for those that have been in relationship. You know, maybe you and your partner are in some circumstances occurring, some stimulus, and now this partner is having a disproportionate or irrational reaction to the immediacy of the actual stimulus. Then you know some past life things happening. Do you see the point? How many have not had this experience? So. Yes. And so in the last few minutes here, I would open it up to anything you would like to ask me.
So I want to ask you something about the Pluto square Pluto, the birth chart, because it seems to be a very important gate to transform a lot of conflicts.
You mean a transit of Pluto squaring natal Pluto? Is that what you're asking?
When Pluto is square Pluto in the yes, transit.
Okay. Yes. It correlates with a fundamental transition in which the past is suddenly experienced in a condensed way. It's in your face. And you're given choices. Pluto always provides choice. Yes. It's not typically an easy transit. You know, I mean, as most of you know, I wrote the book on Pluto back in '86, and in a period of years after this, I could see that Pluto was now beginning to form transit to all my Scorpio planets. And of course, at the same time, squaring Pluto. So I think to myself, well, fuck, I've written this book, I know what's going to hit. Form of arrogance. And it all blew up in my face, my whole life. And I wrote the book. I found myself reading my own book. It's almost as if I wrote my own future. And I find myself reading it to understand what was happening. It was unbelievable. It's a difficult time.
It's something like whether you want to die on
Absolutely so.
an ego level.
Yes. And for some people on a physical level.
Do you want to die,
I said something like you want, if you're able to die on ego level in order to make a step in your transmission, in your evolution.
You know, and the thing is that when you survive Pluto transits of that nature, you always come out stronger. That's the point too. You always come out stronger.
Do you have any hints to survive it? I haven't seen it.
Huh?
Do you have any hints to survive it?
Hints to survive it.
Survival of the fittest.
It really comes down to making a conscious choice to live, and then applying your emotional will to go forwards, no matter what. In that kind of experience, you also have to allow yourself to consciously reflect on the entirety of the past, which has created the necessity of the experience. And in this sort of reflection, you will at some point begin to uncover deep, deep dynamics that reside in the unconscious, that are in fact the causal reasons or factors for what you're going through. The next step is, when you become aware of this, of course, is to apply that knowledge. This is when it can be difficult, because in those situations the soul will feel beyond tired, completely exhausted. And thus to muster the will to keep going is what really the challenge is about. More questions? Have you all got something out of this today?
I have one more question.
One more question.
It's just a technical one on the composite chart, the way of calculating the composite house clusters. Do you use the individual midpoints of each house curve?
That's how I do it.
And not methods
No.
by Robert?
No.
You see, you may get into practical problems at extreme latitudes. Then you get overlapping of house clusters. So
Yes, but you have to understand that the very history of astrology as we know it was, again, the essence of which is observation and correlation, was primarily done by civilizations in the mid-latitudes, not the extremity latitudes. And this is my point. Astrology only works relative to the existing or observed context. Yeah?
What if Pluto is unaspecting?
In a chart?
No aspect with Pluto.
It won't be in this epoch, because it will always be an aspect to Neptune. So you've all got something today? Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.